country. I also am profoundly grateful to have with us tonight Andre Taylor, Dr. Sheila Edwards-Lang, Pastor Kerry Anderson, who will also be giving remarks. I will speak briefly, then the governor will speak, then turn it over to Dr. Sheila Lang, then to Pastor Kerry Anderson, and then Andre Taylor. I'll close, and then we'll take some question and answers. I'm particularly honored to have these speakers with us today because of their individual long-term commitments to justice and equity. And I think we need that, as well as their dedication to wisdom, compassion, and action. Each of them has been leaders over time in our community, and I think we will need their wisdom and the wisdom of others more than ever going forward. I was able to participate in a brief phone call with other members from the African American community. This is a very hard and difficult time, and particularly difficult for Black Americans who saw yet again violence being perpetuated against a man and being killed. It echoes through, as I said earlier today, generations of systemic racism going back to our times in slavery that we as a nation have not come to terms with. We need to do that, and I'm particularly honored also to have Andre here, who was one of the organizers of yesterday's peaceful protest in Westlake, speaking the truth about how I as mayor, the governor as governor, and our whole society need to do better about the injustice he and his family have felt and lived, as well as others. That anger, that grief, and that fight for that cause of justice is a cherished right and what we need to hear at this time. We did not need the violence and destruction that occurred. Today I was also able to meet with small business owners in Chinatown International District and community leaders, and I will tell you that Chinatown International District also has suffered greatly. Throughout this coronavirus pandemic, they were one of the first to suffer a downturn of business because of the prejudice and misinformation about the Chinese community. Many small businesses owned by generations struggling to hang on, and more destruction done to them Friday night and yesterday. Their pain is also deep. We know that the pain is real in Seattle and across this country. Pain for our Black and brown citizens and residents. And this is a time when we need to remember that we must offer the fundamental dignity, respect, and fairness that Mr. Floyd was never allowed. There's pain for people's livelihoods, for the community hubs that have suffered, for all the pain that has occurred during the outbreak of this global pandemic, which also has laid bare the deep inequities in our system, from opportunities for health care, to economic opportunities, to the very social determinants. A kid who is born and grows up in South Park, Seattle, has a lower life expectancy than a kid who grows up in Laurelhurst, Seattle, just miles away. That is wrong. And those deep inequities have shown themselves even greater. We must commit ourselves to changing them. We've seen so many businesses and communities hit by COVID, and it has disproportionately fallen on our communities of color. I want to express my gratitude to all the demonstrators who came peacefully to demand we do better. That's accountability. It's what I as the mayor need and deserve. It's what the governor also needs, and what our community and country need. But the violence that broke out was wrong. And it was wrong from so many levels that I will let the community members here talk about it. But I want to say that we are so grateful to the protesters who were there lawfully and peacefully to express their anger, their grief, their demand for greater justice, who also tried to protect small business owners, who tried to stop some of the looting and violence. I also want to thank all of the volunteers who came to downtown Seattle today, showing up by the hundreds to try to remove graffiti, clean up glass, help the small business owners who've been struggling so much. People came together in neighborhoods across the city to do the same. I want to remind people, in closing, that there is a curfew in Seattle from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. today. This does not prevent you from going to work as an essential employee, to addressing medical emergencies, to doing necessary business. We must also remember we're still under the governor's order of stay home, stay healthy here, and that people should be staying home and staying healthy. If you have any questions about the curfew, you can visit www.seattle.gov/curfew. I also want to emphasize that with people coming together yesterday and the need to gather, the lawful protesters and others, it was, in the light of the pandemic, just the opposite of what we need to do. I would urge all of those community members, please monitor your health. If you believe that you're developing symptoms, make sure that you stay in touch with a community clinic, your local doctor, your healthcare, and if necessary, we will get you tested. We know that this virus spreads by people coming together. It's why we have worked so hard over a 2-month period. But we want to keep people safe in every way. I also want to say to those who have asked, we will make sure that there has been a lot of questions about uses of force. We will make sure that every complaint and every use of force is reviewed, and that if officers exercise force inappropriately, they will be held accountable. Finally, I want us always to remember how and where this started. Mr. Floyd was not given the respect or the dignity he deserved, the degrading treatment that he received at the hands of police, but before that was wrong. His murder was wrong. I continue to send my thoughts and all my support to his family and his loved ones, because I cannot imagine the grief they are feeling, because they carry the grief not just for their loss, but what they see going on in this nation. Every day we must commit ourselves and have our energies directed to improving and moving forward on that path of equity. I'll now turn it over to Governor Inslee, who will make some remarks, and then again we'll go to Dr. Lang, and then we'll move from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and your leadership in difficult times. Obviously, this has been an extremely tough day for the state of Washington yesterday. The pain of this horrific abuse taking a man's life in Minnesota, the pain of seeing the wanton destruction in downtown Seattle, and the pain of seeing people who legitimately have a righteous cause, who are attempting to display their concerns, have that hijacked by some people who wanted to create destruction. And all of those have caused us deep trauma in the state. But I want to tell you, it was very heartening this morning to wake up and the first thing I saw on TV was hundreds of Washingtonians who came down to clean up Seattle. And I think that's a commitment that ought to be heartening to all of us. Going forward, I want to make 3 brief points. First off, we cannot and we will not allow the folks who wanted to create destruction to suppress or obscure the legitimate protest that was going on. We had hundreds of people who were exercising their First Amendment right peaceably, trying to challenge all of us to lift our sights, to reduce inequity in our society. And it was a few that hijacked or attempted to hijack that effort. We cannot and will not allow that important message to be obscured by that violence. Second, and this is a discussion to the rest of the country, when they look at Washington, obviously people saw the destruction on their screens across the country yesterday. But we legitimately ought to be proud of our state and this community, some of whom are here, and Andre particularly, who led our state to have one of, if not the best, police accountability laws, where we improve the ability to hold violence accountable by our law enforcement officers. We also have improved our ability to train officers in de-escalation tactics to reduce the confrontations that occur. And we are not done in that regard. There is more work to be done. And third, as we go forward in the months to come, we understand that the problems in our society, with as blessed as it is, go much deeper than just violence involving law enforcement. The inequities in education, and health care and housing and the reaction to the COVID virus. We have so much more to do to root out systemic inequity in our society. And I hope in the days to come we'll all think of ways to do that, not just regarding law enforcement. I'll just close by thanking our people last night who tried to keep our city safe. About 200 members of the Washington State Patrol. There will be several hundred members of the National Guard who left their families and their jobs to come help keep the peace and keep people safe. We appreciate what they're doing. And we appreciate everybody now finding a way to express ourselves in a way that is safe and also effective. We can do both. With that, we have Dr. Sheila Lang, President of Seattle Community College, who's doing so much for our community. Thank you, Dr. Lang.
Thank you, Mayor Durkin and Governor Inslee, for your leadership. When asked if I would join you today, I actually hesitated to say yes. Why? Because I'm tired, I'm angry, and frankly, I have been grieving since watching what happened in Minnesota. But I know that I have to stand up for what I know to be right, even as I am going through my own personal trauma. I was there yesterday with Not This Time. I saw the thousands of people who wanted to join in community as we are all trying to deal with this trauma of George Floyd's death, and indeed the deaths of so many Black men and women at the hands of police or civilian vigilantes. I heard the call for justice and unity with other communities of color, and the call for working collectively to dismantle racism. But I have to tell you, I also saw groups of mostly white men with huge backpacks, clearly not there for the message of hope and healing, and definitely not there for the memory of George Floyd. I saw folks carrying signs, "Kill the police," and I saw signs that said, "Riot is the language of the unheard." And while it is true that Martin Luther King did say that, he also said, nonviolence is the only way that we can follow because violence is just so self-defeating. A riot ends up creating many more problems for the Negro community than it solves. What we're trying to get rid of is hate and justice and all those other things that continue the long night of man's inhumanity to man. So while I and others are angry about the murder of George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, and too many to name right now, as a Black woman who grew up in the segregated South, the granddaughter of a sharecropper and her maid, I can tell you I am angry and disappointed. But I know that violence and meaningless property destruction is not the way to move forward. Violence and destruction is not the way to hold the police accountable or dismantle the structural racism that continues to allow these things to happen. I've had a lot of allies ask me what they can do. So I say, join us in condemning this violence and destruction in our city. But don't let that be the end. Join us in building an actionable economic plan for Black America. Join us in fighting for the educational justice that our kids deserve. Join us in fighting for housing and health care for everyone in this city. No matter what you do, join us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pastor Kerry Anderson of the First AME Church in Seattle, Washington. And I want to begin by saying words of commendation to our mayor, Mayor Jenny Durkin, for her leadership in such a trying time, and to our governor, Governor Jay Inslee, for the leadership that he provides over this great state of Washington. And to my sister, Dr. Lang, I share her pain. I share in the anger, and I share her grief. And to my brother in love, my brother in the struggle, and my brother in partnership, Brother Andre Taylor. I commend him. I commend him on his efforts in this community, for his foresight and his insight in saying that we as a community can do better in organizing a strategic march that was certainly designed to be one of peace, one of intention, and to have it thwarted by a group outside of our community, outside of our city, outside of our state, that wanted to promote violence and looting. Justice will prevail. Good always outweighs the bad, and love always outshines hate. I'm here today because yesterday, on Saturday at 12 noon at First AME Church, we had a declaration statement in our parking lot, and it was shared with community leaders, the black clergy, the Roman Catholic Church Diocese of Seattle, the NAACP, our Jewish brothers and sisters, and the Muslim community of faith, standing together in solidarity, standing in prayer for the march that was to commence at 3 o'clock at Westlake Mall. And we stood together, we prayed together, we offered comments of praise together of what can our community look like, what our community can look like. We know that we're under some adverse times right now, but we understand that even with COVID-19, as widespread as it is, there is another pandemic that we as a community, we as a city, we as a state, we as a nation, and we as people must come to grips with. That pandemic is the pandemic of racism. Racism did not just start with the killing of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, or even Trayvon Martin or Ahmaud Arbery. Racism began when kings and queens were stolen from the mother country Africa. Racism was already embedded through the transatlantic slave trade. It was already here in 1619. It was woven into the fabric of the United States Constitution, where we were not considered as black folk as people. It was also embedded with the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Yesterday in this march that went totally wrong because of outside influence, we were in the midst of a storm. But today the storm is passing over. It's no longer raining right now. And just think, if COVID-19 can be spread by human touch, why can't love be spread by human touch? If COVID-19 can be spread by contact surfaces, why can't we spread justice through contact surfaces? If COVID-19 can be spread by respiratory particles that may be in the air and someone comes into that space while the particles are still there, why not love, justice, mercy, and peace also be spread because of people that desire to do what's right, for what's right? So the storm is passing over. It's not over yet, but it is passing over. And I'm looking forward to continually working in this community, working side by side with friends of like compassion and like faith, and want social justice to be not for lottie-dottie, but for everybody, so that we can make this city, this county, this state, this nation, and this world what it should be. So we say, to God be the glory for the things that are about to come. Thank you.
My name is Andre Taylor. I'm the founder and executive director of Not This Time. I'm honored to be here with all these brilliant, educated folks with high position because I am the outlier. I come from the streets. I have a checkered past that I had to overcome over 20 years ago. And in the genius that I've learned in overcoming my checkered past, I've tried to bring that to close this gulf, this divide that we have here and around the country. Now follow me, so I'm gonna get a little deep with you. I was at a celebration in Rainier Beach last week with people that Trump calls thugs and I call family because I identify with them. And let me explain this to you. I was there for a while. I seen my niece and I seen other people there. And they were spinning their tires like the youngsters do, and they were celebrating one of their comrades that was killed. It's a lot of people, maybe 300-400 people there. I had my mask on, so nobody really recognized me. So after they were spinning their tires, there was a shot that rang out within that celebration, wasn't to nobody. Sometimes little kids shoot in the air just for the drama. So things got a little hectic for a minute, and then they cleared up. So what I did is I drove my car over to where I seen police officers. And I went up to those police officers and I said, I want to commend you and I want to thank you for not over-exaggerating and giving these young people a space to heal because of one of their comrades had fallen. And I appreciate your patience and that you guys didn't escalate anything. And I just want to personally tell you that I appreciate you. So I got back in my car and I came back to where all the celebration was going on. And as I was driving back to the celebration, I had my mask on. A young fella said, wait a minute, wasn't you over there talking to the police? I said, yeah, that was me. He said, F the police. Why was you over there talking to the police? I said, well, I went over to talk to the police to make sure you were safe and make sure nothing got out of hand. He said, F the police. I said, I understand how you feel. And then it clicked in him. Here, he knew my voice. He said, oh, Uncle. They call me Uncle. I didn't know that was you. I didn't know that was you. I said, yeah, it's me. So he wanted to give me the, the embrace by hitting the shoulders. And he took me over to all the other ones, his inner circle. And the youngsters was coming up to me saying, we appreciate you fighting for us, Unc. And they were celebrating because they were watching. So when incidences like this happen, when we have these professionals come on, they turn off the TV. And I want to make sure that they're not turning off the TV right now because I need to relate to them and talk to them because they're in pain, not only here, but all over this country. I want to let them know that you do not have to be defined by your past, that you can overcome anything that you have done because I sit here before you, a man that did it myself. And as often as I can, I tell my story of redemption. Because I don't want to be in a place that I can empower a young person that's in some of the same situations that I was in, and he has no hope because he feels the city don't care for him. He feels the state, nobody cares for him. And I want him to be able to see me in himself, to give him hope, to give them hope that I too can overcome whatever errors or mistake that I have made. That's my message today. My message yesterday was to the country, was to the city, and was to the state. My message today is for that demographic who Trump calls thugs, who I call family, to let them know you have somebody on your side fighting for you. Amongst these powerful people in these powerful positions, I am here, and when I am here, you are here as well. Don't turn off your TV. Stay engaged, because we all have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
With that, we'll take questions. I also want to acknowledge both Chief Best and Chief Scoggins who are here. For people on the phone, I again want to give them my deep personal gratitude for what they've done, not just in the last 2 days, but truly over the last 2 months, Chief Scoggins has been leading our response to the pandemic in the city. Chief Best, on a daily basis, is having to adjust how they do business. Thank you for your friendship and your work. And with that, we'll take questions on the phone for any of the people who've spoken.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to all of our community advocates who have come in to join us today. As a reminder to everyone on the call, I will be reading you in 2 at a time to give you time to prepare your microphone. If you have a question for someone who is speaking today, please identify who you would like to ask that question of in advance so we can give people time to move around, as we have a lot of people up today. Our first question from David Hyde, KUOW, followed by David Croman, Crosscut. David Hyde, the floor is yours.
Mayor Durkin, a question for you. What do you hear as the main purpose of these protests, and how do you intend to achieve that in your role as mayor?
Thank you, David, for that question. So I think it is, I've said before, it is a deep and complicated issue, but as Dr. Lang said, there's been way too many deaths. This is not just about Mr. Floyd. That was the incident that resonated through a deep, deep history of broken promises, lost opportunities, no personal dignity and respect, starting with slavery through today. It is time for our country to acknowledge the systemic racism that has led to so many inequities, every one of which we've seen during COVID-19. We see the first to suffer the economic impacts were our communities of color, particularly our Black community. We saw those who are getting the disparate health outcomes be our communities of color, particularly our Black community. And we see that those who are most at risk at losing their housing, their jobs, and the like is our Black community. All of those things resonated with people. It is the anger, the grief, the collective trauma that is being expressed. And the best thing I can do as mayor is to listen, to honor, and to center that, but to act and to find ways to address, at least at the city level, on each one of those things, what we can do differently and better. And we do that first by acknowledging our own role and place of privilege, our ability to be where we are because of how I look, but then to say that gives me not just privilege, but responsibility and obligation. And acting on that means every mother has access to health care and good prenatal care. Every child gets good education from preschool through grade school through high school. They get free college, and then they get a job that is a family wage job and not a dead-end job. And so that if we have another economic downturn, they are not the first to lose their jobs. Those are a few of the things.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from David Croman, Costcut, followed by Eric Barnett, C is for Crank. David Croman, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor, there's ongoing negotiations with one police union and soon to be negotiations with a second larger union. Do the events of recent weeks change the city's strategy when it comes to negotiations and the city's priorities?
Very good question. And for the people who don't know, all of you are asking, there's 2 police unions. There's the Police Management Union, which we're already underway in negotiations. And then there's the Police Officers Guild, which is the rank and file sergeants and below, which the negotiations haven't begun, but the contract expires this year. They do not change at all what our commitment is to the community and the public about how we continue to make sure that we both give our officers the support they need to do their jobs, but coming with that is tied to accountability. I couldn't be more proud of Chief Carmen Best, who has instilled and insists on a culture of continuous improvement and holding officers accountable and making sure that every step of the way, the minimum is not enough. And so our contract negotiations will continue to center those issues that have been highlighted. We will be moving forward. I've had discussions with city council members, and we've heard from the Community Police Commission, the civil rights groups who signed the letter originally when I was U.S. Attorney that led to the consent decree. We will continue to have engagement with all of those entities in the community to make sure that when we're at the bargaining table, we can continue to ensure that strong reforms occur.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from Erica Barnett, C is for Crank, followed by Hannah Scott, Cairo Radio. Erica, the floor is yours.
Hi, question for the mayor or Chief Best. You've both mentioned that these were outside agitators coming from outside Seattle and descending on the city. What is the specific evidence that these individuals were not from Seattle?
Thank you for that question, Erica. And I think that there are a lot of different people have used descriptions. What I have made very clear is, regardless of where they came from, they came with a different intent. And that the thousands of people who were protesting honestly and peacefully and forcefully, led by Andre Taylor's and others, to express their deep anger, their grief, and their demand for change by our society, that they came peacefully and acted peacefully. And that those who started the violence came not to join them, not to join in the cause, not to honor Mr. Floyd, but came to, number one, purposely create violence and destruction, two, to provoke and hope to get responses in fights with police, and to destroy property and steal property. They were somewhat successful in their endeavors, but what they did not do, and they will never do, is drown out the message that the community was saying and that we will hear. And as Reverend Kerry said, Reverend Anderson is, and I said yesterday, that division and violence and destruction will never endure more than hope and peace and love. And it will never divert us from the cause of justice.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from Hannah Scott from Cairo Radio, followed by Simone Alicea from KNKX. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Speaking, there's protests going on actually across the state, but in downtown Seattle, nearly 1,000 people again right now, already several arrests, a couple of reporters attacked, and flashbangs going up. What are you going to do differently today than yesterday to protect the property and the people of Seattle? And then for Andre, what would you tell these protesters tonight?
So, Chief Best, do you want to address that? Or do you want me to? I'm going to let Chief Best address the first, and then we'll turn the mic over to Andre.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And before I answer that question for you, Hannah, I just want to thank the speakers here today, Dr. Lang, Dr. Reverend Kerry Anderson, and Andre Taylor for their very powerful, of course, our governor, for their very, very powerful words of encouragement today. I was absolutely just gratified to hear those kind words and those wonderful sentiments. I can tell you that, yes, there is a protest going on right now, which is part of the reason I came in here a little bit late, because I was monitoring activities. We have a crowd, as you mentioned, I should say, of about 1,000 folks. We are currently working to manage that crowd. Again, I've been in here for the last few minutes, so I don't have the latest update. I can tell you, as the mayor said, that there is a curfew that started at 5 p.m., and we fully intend to enforce that curfew in the city from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. And so we're working on what that looks like now and what the strategy is, and more to follow. I can't give you more detail. I'm obviously not clairvoyant. What we would hope is that we get voluntary compliance and that there is no need to take any further action. But if that doesn't happen, then we'll be progressively looking at ways to, again, follow the curfew so that we don't have people tearing up our lovely city, looting, destroying property, assaulting officers, assaulting people who are there peacefully. And so that's what I have for you at this time. I'm sure you'll get more updates as events progress. Thanks.
I'm going to have Andre talk. I just want to follow up. This is Jenny Durkin, if you did know. In addition, I just want to recognize that we have the Brigadier General from the National Guard in the room. The National Guard has been deployed. They will help protect property and do some crowd control if necessary. It's an asset we didn't have last night. And the additional thing is that not only is there a clear curfew at 5 o'clock, but the thousands of peaceable protesters who we had to ensure the safety of last night are not the ones that are in Westlake now. And so the tactics can be different to make sure that we disperse people. If they do not disperse, that they can be arrested if necessary. I want to turn it over to Andre Taylor.
Hi, Hannah. How are you? Let me just be clear and give you a report of yesterday. Out of those 10,000 plus people that came to Not This Time rally from Westlake all the way to 7th and Stewart, the federal courthouse, there was not one incident of violence. So whatever they were doing, we weren't deterred by. But let me say this also. Somehow people think that the black community allows lawlessness. We don't allow lawlessness. We hate it just as much as any community. And whenever lawlessness is going on, there has to be authority that comes into place to make sure that it's not harming people and harming people's property and the like. So if there's lawlessness going on, the SPD has a responsibility, and now the National Guard, to make sure that it is quelled. Let me just say this, and then I'm going to get off. I often talk to community members and when they're angry with me, and I say, listen, if we had our own country right now, would you allow lawlessness? Would you allow somebody to break into your house, rape your wife, shoot your mama? Would you allow it? No, you wouldn't. So when you're mad at people that have laws in place to make sure that society continues to move forward, and you're angry with that, that's a problem, because you wouldn't accept it if we had our own country right now. So I want to bring up real quick, this is out of order, but I want to make sure Pastor Kerry Anderson is able to talk about a prayer vigil, because people are still in pain, they're still hurting, and sometimes they need a place to go to, white, black, or whoever. If you need a place to go to, please, we're having a prayer vigil tomorrow, and let him tell you where it's at. Sorry, Mary.
No, that's good.
Thank you, Andre. Tomorrow, Monday at 12 noon at First AME Church, we are having a prayer vigil for persons of all races, persons of all colors, but persons who stand for justice, persons who want to see racism, that curve, flattened. You're welcome to come. You're welcome to pray. We're going to practice social distancing. We will also invite you to bring your personal sanitizers, and we will also ask that you bring your face shield. But it is open tomorrow, First AME Church, Seattle, 1522 14th Avenue. And I might add, First AME Church is the oldest black church in the state. We were founded before the state was even chartered, 1886.
Thank you, Dr. Reverend. Our next question will be from Simone Alicea from KNKX, followed by Chris Daniels, King 5. Simone, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This question is for Mayor Durkin or Chief Best. Do we have any clarity or specifics around how many people were injured Friday and Saturday, and also specifically how many of those injuries were from police crowd control tactics?
We don't have all the statistics, but we'll get that to you. There were not widespread injuries and no significant injuries that we're aware of, and there was no loss of life. But we can get you that specific information once we are able to compile it. Obviously, that it has been a very dynamic situation, and some of the after-action analysis has not yet been done.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from Chris Daniels, King 5, followed by Mike Carter, Seattle Times. Chris Daniels, the floor is yours.
Mayor, we're getting a lot of questions into our newsroom about the point of a curfew, that some people think that this actually makes things worse. You already noted this afternoon that nobody was arrested for violating the curfew last night. So you say you're enforcing it, but nothing has changed. What is the point at this hour?
So there's three things. Number one is, even without the curfew, I would remind people, I've got the governor here, and his stay-home order is still in effect. And so in a way, the curfew is a duplication. It should not be making things worse, because people should be staying home unless they've got a necessary job they're going to. The pandemic is real. It is still happening, and we want to make sure that people are not gathering. So number one, that point. Number two is, after speaking with the chief of police and consulting with other leaders, the curfew is another tool that does two things. One, it takes the lawful people off the street. And so the people who are remaining are those who have made the decision that they will defy the law, and that is a very different group than those who were gathering yesterday. Third, it gives the police a tool if they need to when they ask people to disperse. There is a lawful basis to ask them to disperse, regardless of what their activity is. And so the curfew gives us a tool that I think is necessary. And frankly, I have heard from many community members that they wish the curfew had gone into effect earlier this week and that it would continue. We will evaluate that, but it is in effect right now. And if anyone's watching this on their phone and they're still outside in Seattle, they should go home.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike Carter from Seattle Times will be our next question, followed by Jason Rance, KTTH. Mike Carter, the floor is yours.
Madam Mayor, of course, we're all the march yesterday within next tragedy of what happened.
Hey, Mike, you're breaking up just a little bit. If you could either.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, sorry. I'll lean forward. I guess my question deals with not just what happened to Mr. Floyd, but also the systemic racism that seems to exist in law everywhere. I was looking at the most recent auditor's report, compliance report of the Seattle Police Department sustainment plan, I believe it was, on February 19th, and it mentions that African Americans remain most likely to believe that the Seattle Police Department engages in both racial profiling, with 69% saying SPD does it often, that African Americans and Latinos are more than twice as likely to report having been stopped by police than white residents. I'm just curious about what continued efforts you're making to address these issues in your department.
Thanks, Mike, for the question. And I'll let the chief follow if she wants to, but there are multiple things. So first, coming out of the consent decree, when we did the investigation, unfortunately, at that time, Seattle Police Department did not keep any data with regards to demographics. And so when we did the investigation, we could not prove that there was biased policing. Part of the consent decree, as you know, included requirements around biased policing and requirements that certain data be kept. It's been shown to be really important because the numbers you cite are the numbers of public confidence. How do people feel? But even more than that now, we have a lot of information about the disparities that exist at every level of the criminal justice system, including the enforcement of the Seattle Police Department. One of the last reports that we issued was the disparity report, which shows that there is still a disparity between white people and communities of color in policing, which is not surprise to any of the people up here standing with me today. It is incredibly complicated and difficult, and there's no city or state in America who has gotten it right. But we will continue to deeply engage with community, to get behind the numbers, to get to the root causes of all of these disparities. And it goes back not just to the policing, because by the time the police are interacting with someone, there are so many disparities already hard baked into the system. From the access to health care, the access to housing, the access to education, and the access to real jobs and opportunities and economy. But probably most important, the access to a belief that the system values you, that you have the respect and dignity as a human being that you deserve. And so this goes far beyond just policing. It's something that we have to work on every level of our society. And as mayor, I try to work on it across the board in every program that we touch, and to learn more every day.
Rants, KTTH, followed by Lily Fowler, Crosscut. Lily, your question will be our final question for today. Jason Rants, the floor is yours.
Hi, I have two quick questions. First, on the curfews that are obviously in place right now, what are you looking at, Mayor Durkin, as to whether or not you're going to continue them into the week? I'm assuming some of what's happening nationally may also play a role. And then my second question for Governor Inslee, President Trump today said he was going to label Antifa a terrorist organization. Obviously, there's been instances of violence perpetuated by Antifa here, but also anarchists. What are your thoughts on that potential move, and would you support it?
So, Jason, I'll take the first question. We will continue to evaluate tonight how the curfew has worked. I want to remind people it's not just a curfew for downtown. It is citywide curfew, so people should not be out unless they have a reason to be out, medical condition, necessary job. We'll evaluate whether it is something that helped restore stability, and I'll talk to the chief of police and our fire chief primarily to determine whether, in their view, it makes sense to continue it. And so we'll look at it tonight, and tomorrow morning we will give the community, obviously, more notice than we were able to give yesterday, because we think it's important that people know what the expectations are for them. I do want to remind people again, before I have the governor come up and answer your second question, is we are still in a stay-home order. Seattle and King County have not moved to stage 2 yet, phase 2. And the more people go out and come together, the more they risk their own health and the health of everyone that they go back to. So I would just urge, regardless of the curfew, please stay home. We have worked so hard for 2 months to break the back of this virus. People have sacrificed so much in those 2 months. People have lost their businesses and their jobs. Please, please stay home. Governor, I'll let you take the second one.
Yeah, I've not been briefed on that issue at all, so I'll reserve any statements until we hear from our law enforcement community about this. I will say this, we could certainly use a little more leadership from the White House to try to help this nation heal and move forward rather than looking for partisan advantage. I hope that will be the case.
Thank you, Governor. Our final question today is from Lily Fowler, Crosscut. Lily, the floor is yours.
Hi, yeah, I've got two questions. The first one is for the mayor. You've talked about how it was the police that escalated the protests last night, and you've talked about putting out a timeline showing that that's the case. I'm wondering when you envision that timeline coming out, and wouldn't it be more accurate to say that there's probably some blame to go around, that it was probably not either or the police or civilians acting in poor fashion, but some of both happening last night?
So thank you, Lily, for the question. We will get the timeline out shortly. I'll let you know. Someone will contact you after this. I'm not sure the exact where that is in the process, so that you have it. And I want to really stress how important words are here. Blame is not a word that I have tried to use. I've tried to relate the facts that I think are true, the facts that I saw myself that occurred during the day, the facts as were being reported to me live. And I can tell you, it is a fact that early in the afternoon, we had a number of protests going on that were peaceful around City Hall, around the police station. People protested, they did it peacefully, and there were no adverse encounters of significance with police. Andre Taylor's group and people, as he said, thousands of people in Westlake who gathered peacefully, who marched to the courthouse, and there was not a single act of violence or a single altercation with the police. At the same time that was going on, literally, Blocks away, it was a very different scene with people who came with backpacks full of weapons of different kinds, from pipes to sticks to frozen water bottles to incendiary devices. So I will say that when people come and they have that activity, they should expect a response from the police, because the police have a duty to keep people safe, to protect property, and to allow people who are downtown Seattle expressing their right to protest what I and other leaders in the world have done to organize our society in a way that is unfair and unjust and demand that we do better. They should have the right to do that, and they should have the right to do it for as long as they want without that kind of interference.
Mayor, can I just
interject?
Lily, I just want to correct. I don't know if you meant to say it, but you said that the mayor said that it was started by the police, and I don't believe she has ever said that. I think her explanation clarified that. I just don't know if that was just a misspeak or what, but I just wanted to make sure for the record the mayor did not say that.
And I also want to, Lily, I'll add this, which is probably improvident, but there's a lot of discussion over the years about whataboutism. And we will hold the police accountable, Chief Best and I, and if any officer acted in a way that used force that was improper or that violated our standards, they will be investigated and they will be held accountable. But there is no excuse for people coming to a place where people are gathering and to throw incendiary devices, use sticks and bottles and rocks to throw at the police, and then to break into buildings, to loot what is there, to cause as much damage as they can, to set vehicles on fire. That is not protesting, that is looting and criminal behavior. I want to thank again the people who are here tonight. Would any of you like to have a word, final word? Governor?
Yeah, let me get a final word after the governor.
All right.
No, before the governor. He's a big guy. Governor's a big guy. Governor, you want to come in here with me?
No, go ahead. I got to scoot. So.
Oh, you got to go? Well, let me go.
Let
me let you go
ahead.
first.
I'm good.
Anyway, let me just say that I am happy that the fact that the mayor and Chief Best has spoken strongly against what happened to George Floyd. I'm happy that the governor has stepped over here with us and has spoken to that as well. And that is necessary for us. Unless we have leadership get in front of this, make the community believe that it's real when they say they're going to hold people accountable. That's important. But I also want to acknowledge that they spoke strongly, and I know people say it's just words. I'm the first one who say it. But then you can hold people accountable for their words, right, when they say them. So it's important for them to be able to get in front of the public to say those words so that we can say, well, this is what you said, right? But I want to acknowledge that they were said. And I've been all around the country. I've been watching all around the country. I have not heard one political person all over this country speak as strong as the mayor did. Not one. And I appreciate her for coming out real strong with no sugar, just straight to the point and straight to the truth. Thank you.
Governor, we don't get the last word.
We're good.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
You're watching special coverage from King 5 News of a news conference that just wrapped up featuring Seattle's Mayor Jenny Durkan, Washington Governor Jay Inslee, Dr. Sheila Lang, the president of Seattle Central College, the Reverend Kerry Anderson, the head of the First AME Church in Seattle, and the very last person at the podium, Andre Taylor from the organization Not This Time, which is dedicated to ending police violence. To recap, pretty much that entire group on the same page. What happened to George Floyd was shameful, but all of them in agreement that violence and destruction of property is not the answer. I want to bring in my colleague Joyce Taylor to just kind of debrief. Joyce, what jumped out at you from what everyone said today?
Well, I think Dr. Lang, what she talked about being the daughter of a sharecropper and a maid and being in anger, grieving, and hesitating to want to speak publicly, but feeling that she needed to because it's the right thing to do, and that she is so supportive of people protesting peacefully, and like most of us, against the violence that we saw, because it doesn't do any good and it gets in the way of the message.
Yeah, and her message, and she said it over and over again, join us.
Right.
If you're upset, join us.
Yeah.
If, urging everyone to join together to help fix what's wrong in America. I thought what was interesting is Police Chief Carmen Best said that, we've been under curfew for about 30 minutes now, and Chief Best said that she, quote, fully intends to enforce the curfew tonight. And we're looking live now from Capitol Hill, where a separate protest has been forming up. This is east of downtown, up on Capitol Hill, and we're keeping tabs on that. So Chief Best saying they intend to fully enforce the curfew, and the mayor going even further, saying that tactics can be different tonight. The mayor making a distinction that thousands of people had gathered at Westlake Park yesterday for a peaceful protest, and some of those protesters we interviewed here on King 5 yesterday said their protest got hijacked. So we actually may see different tactics based on what the mayor and Police Chief Carmen Best said.
Also a reminder that we are in the middle of a pandemic, Mark, and I really appreciated what Pastor Kerry Anderson said, because he said, there is this pandemic that we're going through as a nation, and as we know, people of color have suffered more in this pandemic, more loss of life, more loss of jobs, and on top of that, now, of course, the view of social and the inequities and injustice system that we've seen. And so a lot of people are wondering, why are we seeing these protests not just here but across the nation at the level that we haven't seen really since the 60s, even more so than in the 60s, some might argue. And it's, I think, because collectively the black community, brown and black people, have suffered more in the last couple of months, I think, than in recent history because of all that's going on, including the pandemic.
Yeah.
We want to get to Vanessa Mashania, who's out on the streets. She's in Seattle. There are a couple of different protests on the move now, one on Capitol Hill and one in downtown. What's going on where you are?
Hey, Joyce, well, we're following the one going into Capitol Hill right now, and this is a continuation of the one that we saw in Westlake. We'll pan over to, we're at the very end of it. You can see the police cruisers and the folks walking up. Now, this demonstration that we were just at, it began at Westlake, went down 2nd, up James, and then went down 4th. The message was remain peaceful. People in the crowd, some of them did try to agitate, antagonize police at times, and then the leaders told them, hey, knock it off, that's not what this is about. And one of the leaders, his name's Carl Smith, he said he actually worked with Seattle PD to organize this, and he said that their message was just too important to let it get clouded by scenes of violence or fires like we saw yesterday. Take a listen. Why did you want that to resonate with this crowd?
Because I think when you see the interactions on the news, it doesn't show this. Like, no one in this crowd caused any problems, setting any trouble. We worked with Lieutenant Diamond, who's with the Seattle Police Department, and he actually helped us organize this. And when you do it the right way, you get your message across. Like, everyone here it's all about love and peace, and that's what we wanted to exude today. The tragedy that happened, it happened, but we're looking towards the future and moving forward. Destroying a building doesn't change anything. It doesn't. We want to make real change and real impact, so that's why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, and I even heard you tell people not to antagonize,
Yes.
and you physically stopped people on the street
yes.
who were trying to
Yes.
do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? That earned trust between myself and the police. The police started looking to me like, hey, can you help me with this, help me with that? And I felt, as that's my duty. Like, for some reason, these people listen to me. I'm not a leader. I just came here and showed up to voice my frustration. But if I can do something to help the cause in general, then I'm going to do it.
And you told folks to get home safely, to organize when you get home. What do you want the message, the takeaway to be here today?
I think the message just needs to be consistent. I mean, if you're tired, if you're fed up of unarmed black individuals being killed by the police, then this is your time, this is your moment to say something. You have a voice. Everyone has a voice. And just, if you don't know what to do, like, that's why I gave everyone here my contact information so they can reach out to me, so we can help organize together. And whether it's in their local community or wherever they live. Not everyone here is from Seattle, and I recognize that. So you can't just focus on the area. People need to focus on their individual and their local municipalities and make change at that level to make it on a grander scale. So.
Again, that was organizer Carl Smith, who was really one of the leaders of the demonstration. We saw that began at Westlake is continuing on into Capitol Hill. And I just want to say that when this disbanded from Westlake, the leaders of the group were actually working with police and asking them, hey, where can we go? We all have to get home. And police carved out a way up Pike Street in order to make that happen. So there was a real partnership, like you just heard from Carl, between police and organizers to make this happen and make sure that the messages from these folks, Black Lives Matter, justice for not only George Floyd, but for everyone else who felt that the system has been against them, right? We've heard from so many people today. Their message did get across today, and they made sure that they did it in a peaceful way, guys.
Vanessa Mashania reporting live downtown. Vanessa, thank you. If you're just joining us, it's 5:36 right now in the evening. A curfew has been in effect for about 36 minutes for the city of Seattle for a second straight night. We do want to mention that Interstate 5 is closed in both directions. If you're thinking about coming into the city of Seattle, don't. If you're coming from the north at Roanoke, the freeway is closed. If you're coming from the south at Holgate, the freeway is closed and traffic is being diverted off. Police, once again, really trying to keep the numbers down. As we speak, there is a group marching on Capitol Hill as well in Seattle tonight. But the real hotspot tonight is actually on the east side in Bellevue. Police have shut down 10th Avenue Northeast. We have gotten reports that Macy's has been looted. There have been windows broken, projectiles thrown at police. So we're going to get to Bellevue in just a minute. But first now let's go to King 5's Chris Daniels. He was just at the news conference featuring the governor and the mayor and a number of other leaders from our community. Chris.
Yeah, and Bellevue didn't obviously come up at this press conference in Seattle. I'm told that the governor who was here is aware of what is going on, and there's been communication with the city of Bellevue about potentially calling in the National Guard, which is the request of Bellevue's mayor. And yes, I know those of you who have tweeted at me on social media, we are aware, and they are aware here, the governor is, of what is going on. As far as in the city of Seattle tonight, you heard a lot of questions at that press conference that we brought to you live about the curfew that is technically in effect right now, but not necessarily being enforced by Seattle police. And there is now discussion about exactly how police handled the situation last night. Here's what the chief and the mayor had to tell us a bit earlier today about law enforcement's efforts last night in downtown.
These were not the acts of allies.
An uncharacteristic display of emotion from Seattle's mayor.
And it wasn't a downtown that I recognized.
Jenny Durkin claims outsiders are to blame for the destruction downtown, which came after a peaceful demonstration sparked by the killing of George Floyd. The damage is unlike any event in the last 2 decades, with opportunistic vandals and a police department that on one hand is the target of the demonstration and yet still tasked with keeping the peace.
Yesterday, late afternoon and late into the evening, with looting going on throughout the downtown at multiple locations, people downtown well past the curfew. The folks had their way in our city, and that should never happen again. And we need to understand the level of resources that were deployed and how they were deployed.
Downtown Seattle Association President John Scholes is among those questioning strategies, given Seattle police experience with handling large demonstrations.
What was the strategy? It seems like the strategy here on crowd control was different than protests we've seen in past years. Why were people still looting after the curfew was in place?
Our strategy was really to try to make sure that people had the opportunity to exercise their right to free speech and to demonstrate and to protest in their constitutionally protected free speech rights. What happened in this case is we had a lot of people, and I know you were out there as well, a lot of people came into town with nothing but destruction and mayhem and intent to harm cops on their mind.
We also heard in the press conference that just wrapped up the Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin and Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best alluding to the fact that now that curfew is in place and this was not one of the sanctioned scheduled protests downtown like yesterday, that this will allow them to use different tactics perhaps to clear the streets. We haven't seen that, however, quite yet. That's the story for now live in Seattle. I'm Chris Daniels. Back to you.
Okay, we want to go to this video now. This is out of Bellevue. This is from one of our viewers who sent this to us, showing us some of the looting that we are told is happening at Macy's. Thanks, Chris Bell, for sending this to us. So this is what the police in Bellevue are dealing with right now. They've already closed down Northeast 8th Street. We're hearing about broken windows, and this, of course, is right at the Bellevue Mall, right off of Bellevue Way, Northeast 8th. And when I talked to the chief earlier today, maybe about 2 hours ago, he told me that enforcements were going to be coming in and they were getting ready for what they thought was going to be a peaceful protest. But again, what we saw in Seattle, some of that's now going on in Bellevue, some looting happening there at the Macy's store. Now, we heard from the governor that the National Guard is going to be out in the state, Seattle, I'm assuming, maybe Bellevue, to help protect property. No signs of the National Guard yet in Bellevue. But again, we know that enforcements are coming into Bellevue. And we're seeing looting happening right now in Bellevue, right in the mall. So as you know, all the stores have been closed because of the pandemic. They've all been shuttered because only curbside pickup at some stores has been allowed, but for the most part, the mall is closed, and people know that and are clearly taking advantage of the fact that nobody's inside any of these stores, and they are just freely going in, some of these people.
And Joyce, we're just hearing that the city of Bellevue is going to hold a news conference in about 18 minutes at 6 o'clock tonight. I want to ask you more, though. You spent a few minutes with the police chief from Bellevue a little bit ago. Did he have anything to say that might shed some light on what's going on?
Well, one of the first things that he wanted me to know, actually, is that he was horrified at the video. And he said he was even watching it again last night of what happened to George Floyd, and he couldn't even watch it in its entirety. And he said he talked to every single one of his officers on the force about this video, and he said every single one of them, in his words, condemned it, rejected it. And then I talked to him about sort of the broader picture. It wasn't just the one officer kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, but the other officers who were standing around who seemed to be just, another day at the office, the indifference that some people seem to see in that visual. And talked about the broader issue of the culture. And, he said, what this does is put us on the defensive again as a police department. And we've gone through so much to try to do so much work to get the community to trust us, to know that we're out to protect them and their interests. And this is just a setback.
Yeah, this is just a bizarre sight, Joyce, that we're looking at now. This isn't a few people, many, many people now looting the Macy's store in Bellevue.
It's pathetic.
Yeah, it's coming in and out and just...
And here's the thing, there are cameras all through Bellevue Square and Bellevue Mall and outside and inside. And it's just interesting to me that people think that, or aren't aware that cameras are up, and it's probably a matter of time before people are going to be able to identify who's going in and out. Never mind that it's completely criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
awful.
I want to get back to, as we look live, this is again Bellevue, an aerial shot over the Macy's store where looting is taking place as we speak. I want to go back to some of what was said in the news conference, Joyce, and I found it really interesting, some of the comments that were made, and we should say that there is a prayer vigil going to be held tomorrow at the First AME Church, Reverend Anderson, and I thought it was really interesting, the term, the phrase that he used. He said, we need to flatten the racism curve, making a connection with the COVID-19, inviting people of all faiths, all persuasions to come and celebrate tomorrow at a prayer vigil to try to do something about what's going on in our country. It's at 1522 14th Avenue. The oldest church in the state of Washington predates statehood.
Yeah, that's
1886.
Right. That's right. As we all watch this at home, I know most of us are thinking we are so much better than this. This is not who we are. And these few bad actors really puts a scar on what it is we are trying to accomplish as a state and as a city. It's just, it's heartbreaking to watch this. I know most people probably feel collectively that this is just pitiful to watch. And it takes away from the message of what people are doing and why they are out trying to protest. You were talking about some of what was said. It was interesting to me that the mayor brought together the group that she did, because to me, I felt like she understands the problem and she's trying to get everyone else to understand the bigger issue, in case they don't already. to bring people together that have lived through decades of discrimination to explain why we are still in a time where discrimination is very real and why we all need to collectively focus on it. So it was curious to me, it was interesting to me that she brought that group together, and I think probably really beneficial for everyone who's watching in the state. Pastor Kerry Anderson, especially Dr. Lang, and also what she said in particular, and I wonder if I can find it, just that, we are so not in a time where we're past discrimination and injustice, and that people need to recognize that we have so much more work to do.
Yeah. Joyce, I just heard in my ear from our producer, Tom, that a state of civil emergency has just been declared for Bellevue. This is exactly what happened in the city of Seattle last night from Mayor Durkin. And a curfew is now in effect as we speak for the city of Bellevue until 5 a.m. So the city of Bellevue mirroring almost exactly what happened last night here in the city of Seattle. The mayor realizing that things were getting out of hand quickly. And it's interesting, as we look at that aerial shot of Macy's, I don't see any law enforcement. I mean, it's shocking that we've been on the air for how many minutes now, and we don't see a police response.
Well, and it's a little bit worrisome because there are lots of shopping areas in that vicinity. Lincoln Square is right next to it. There are so many stores. The Bravern is a couple blocks down, and so not sure what their strategy is, but maybe they've been dispatched to other places and there are problems that we don't know about yet. Yeah. Because I know that they're there. I know the police are there. I know they have enforcements that have come in. The police chief told me that. So, but I'm with you. Where is the police? And what else is going on elsewhere in the city that they can't respond to this? Because I know they're seeing what we're seeing. Listen, we want to go to Cal Anderson Park to Seattle for a moment, if we could. And Sebastian Robertson, who is there on the scene of the protest that's on the move. Sebastian.
Yeah, we can keep walking. The protest has been moving for quite a little bit now. We're walking past Cal Anderson Park as we head down 10th Street back towards downtown. The protest, by design, has tried to be as peaceful as possible. There have been a couple of people that have kind of made themselves the leader of the group that seem to get people to follow. There have been several chants calling for peace to not distract from the message that they're trying to convey here. We've seen. Why'd you feel the need to do this?
There's nothing else we can do besides help at this point. It's wrong. It's just wrong.
We want to be as supportive as we possibly can be for everyone who came out to these protests. And
were you here yesterday?
I was not. I was at work yesterday, but I wish I could have been.
I was not as well. I had to work.
What was your feeling after yesterday, and what was kind of the motivation coming into today?
I was really pained that I couldn't be here and help stand for everyone yesterday, but I wanted to come here and help today, and that's why I made sure I had my car fully loaded with water and supplies to help clean up and make sure everyone was hydrated.
What was it like cleaning up today?
Honestly, when we got down here at around 3 o'clock, there wasn't much to clean up, but there was a lot of marching still, so we just grabbed the water and started helping that way.
We must have handed out about 6 cases of water.
So we're now approaching Broadway as protesters continue to walk through here, chanting George Floyd. That's the reason these protests have been happening, and that's what they want to keep the attention on. Police, like we've talked about all night, playing the dual role. They're tasked with keeping protesters safe, but they're also the target of the criticism across much of the country. Police trying to ride that thin line. That being said, there have been some altercations already. We saw 2 people get taken into custody, and we heard that loud banging sound, and then later saw some pieces from flashbang grenades going off. That was early on. Things have calmed down dramatically again as the protest works its way now off of Broadway back towards downtown for a walk that is expected to continue for some time. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Sebastian, I want to ask you a quick question, if we could. The mayor's press conference that just wrapped up, both the mayor and Police Chief Carmen Best said that they fully intend to enforce the curfew tonight in Seattle, and said that the tactics can be different tonight because this group clearly is in violation of this curfew. Do you have any sense that these people have plans to leave anytime soon?
Well, sorry about that. Protesters have tried to kind of tune into what's happening. We've seen a couple of people streaming our broadcast and other news broadcasts, so there is some sense that they're following what's happening here. As for the curfew itself, well, the police did come on the loudspeaker right when this started, about 4:30, declaring this an unlawful gathering, saying that action would be taken in about 5 minutes. There was then a standoff, and you could see the Seattle police begin to put on gas masks, and everyone here kind of feared that those gas canisters would be deployed. That didn't happen. Police taking more of a role of kind of guiding the protest as it moves along, really not holding them at any point. Again, that was the only mention by police of that 5 p.m. curfew. The mayor asking people to go home, police asking people to disperse, the National Guard also on standby. No signs that this is going to be slowing down anytime soon as the protesters work their way now off Broadway and towards downtown Seattle.
All right, Sebastian Robertson reporting live for us downtown. Sebastian, thank you. Appreciate it. Apologies for the profanity. Unfortunately, you're going to hear and see profanity as we continue our coverage. We want to go live now to our Drew Mickelson in the International District. Business owners have been hit hard by what's been happening over the past day or so here in the city of Seattle. And Drew has a case in point for that. Drew.
Good afternoon, Mark. Yeah, unlike some areas of downtown Seattle and downtown Bellevue, it's relatively quiet here in the Chinatown International District. Folks here are glad that that is the case. It was also the case last night, though, and some folks took advantage of that and hit some businesses that are already reeling.
They smashed open the door, they took the register, they opened all the drawers, they ripped everything out.
Jade Garden's owner, Eric Chan, is overwhelmed.
I just want to work in peace. I just want to serve the community. That's all I want to do.
This time, it was burglars, captured on surveillance video and from a neighbor's window. But this place has been boarded up since March, when vandals first smashed the restaurant's windows in what was believed to be anti-Chinese backlash over coronavirus.
Please just leave us alone. I just want to work, man. My wife is here, my family's here, my whole family's here. We just work.
In the family-owned restaurant's 17 years.
And it's like a staple. This is one of my favorite places.
They've never closed. And hours after the latest hit, they were back open and customers lined up to offer support.
Yeah, I was angered. I was mostly just sad.
There's obviously a lot of racism going on against the Asian community and so forth. So it's like, so yeah, anything we can do to help is good.
It means everything for everyone's support. It means everything to us right now.
In a time when there's so much bad.
Thank you guys so much.
Eric Chan says it's refreshing to see a little good.
Thankfully, yes.
Now, these are some businesses just about a block away from the Jade Garden, and they just this afternoon got those boards put up by Seattle Public Utilities crews. They are out here just in case things ramp up again today. We also saw a bunch of volunteers with cleaning supplies scrubbing off some of the graffiti out here. It's a real nice moment. Some of the folks at some of these Chinese restaurants were bringing food out to these volunteers, and we saw a lot of smiles and elbow knocks. So there are some signs of good here. And like we said, right now it is nice and quiet in the Chinatown International District. Back to you.
All right, Drew Mickelson, thank you. And as we bring in my colleague Joyce Taylor, Joyce, good to be in the same building with you. And we want to let people know that not all bad has been happening. In fact, some really good things started right when the sun came up this morning, right, Joyce?
You know, it was great to see. It wasn't just here, too. It was in other cities across the country where people came out in big numbers. They brought their children to actually clean up some of the destruction from last night, to sweep up the glass, to clean up the mess that was made, because they know that our city is better than this. And Amity Adrisi shows us what happened here this morning.
Thousands of people tore through the heart of Seattle trying to destroy. But as the sun came up, thousands more came to rebuild.
They stopped the mess, they stopped people from grieving, and it was just horrible. So I came down to help put this city that I love so much back the way it ought to be.
Chris Porter says the riots silenced the true meaning of the protests, to grieve George Floyd and fight for change.
I'm a father, and when I looked at that, I just thought, that could be my son, that could be me. And at some point, humanity has to take over. We have to find a way to turn around how we police communities of color.
I don't think that the riots are going to drown out the greater message of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that movement is being amplified by all of the people turning out to help clean up the city this morning.
Sarah Ferrani drove up from Tacoma with her bucket of supplies, one of many hoping to scrub away the hate and erase the violence.
I visited downtown this morning, and it wasn't a downtown that I recognized.
Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan fighting back tears during a news conference, devastated by the destruction, but confident in her community.
But what I did recognize were the hundreds of volunteers and residents who came because they love Seattle.
A community that came together to sweep up the glass, pick up the pieces, and show a lot of love.
There's more love in this city than there's hate.
Amatia Idrisi, King 5 News.
Wow.
That's who we are, right?
Yeah, I think it's easy in these types of situations, Joyce, for people to generalize about everything, honestly. People are good, people are bad, these people are to blame, these people are not the problem. And that's you're right, it's just a great example of there are way more good people in this community than people who want to cause trouble. That's not to say we don't have problems, we do, but that's a heartwarming thing to see.
It's also understanding, because we have kids, there's a generation that's never seen anything like this before.
Yeah.
All of this, not just here, but across the country, and trying to explain to them what's happening and then show them how to make their way through it by coming and helping to clean up and to do the right thing. What a great life experience for the people who brought their kids down.
What a teachable moment, you bet.
Yeah,
We want to let people know, Joyce, we're going to be preempting nightly news. It's not going to be airing because some pretty serious things are happening in the city of Bellevue, and we do have an aerial shot. The Macy's in Bellevue is being looted as we speak. This is from Twitter, that Chris Bell on Twitter posted this a short time ago. Massive looting underway at the Macy's in Bellevue, and in fact the city is holding a news conference in just a couple of minutes that we intend to take live to try to understand how that city is going to restore order.
And looking live now at that picture you're talking about from Sky King, but pretty large group is gathered in Bellevue. This is the peaceful protest that's happening in Bellevue, while outside of this, at the mall, we've seen that looting that's going on. We are standing by for a press conference that's expected to happen right at the top of the hour to hear what their plan is. But a curfew has been put in place there in Bellevue for 5:30. And we've been told that the Bellevue Police Department, from the chief, Stephen Milet, has called in enforcements. What that means, I'm not sure how many. We don't know yet. But peaceful protest is what we're seeing here in Bellevue, and then the massive looting that we saw, people going in and out of the Macy's, just hauling stuff out. Shocking. Really.
And we probably will see some highway closures here in the city of Seattle. The curfew has been in effect for an hour now, and Interstate 5 in and out of Seattle is shut down. At the north, just north, kind of around the Ship Canal Bridge, the freeway is shut down, and to the south, Holgate is where you cannot get into the city of Seattle. So, as you know, everyone, 405 goes right through the heart of Bellevue. It'll be interesting to see if those exits to the city of Bellevue are shut off now that that curfew is in place until 5 a.m. tomorrow.
It was interesting, too, what the mayor said about the curfew and why it's in place and why they plan to enforce it. She said the curfew is going to take lawful people off the streets, and it will give authorities an extra tool to use to try to clear the streets and keep the peace. A lot of people who are still out are protesting for the right reasons. Maybe they're unaware of the curfew. We hope that they'll soon find out if they are unaware, because let's remember, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's a state order that people really stay home unless they need to be out and traveling or going to work. But for a number of reasons, people should be headed home right now.
So as we look at Bellevue and we anticipate that news conference is going to be starting, some of you tuning in to see Nightly News, unfortunately we will not be bringing you Nightly News tonight, but we feel like it's really important to stay on top of some of these local events. This is really going to be a resource issue because authorities had their hands full last night just in downtown Seattle, and now we've got downtown Seattle plus downtown Bellevue. under a great deal of stress from people who are intent on looting, frankly. We do want to give you sort of a heads up on what's going on nationally now as we wait for that press conference. Jennifer Johnson has the latest on what's going on around the country.
Across America, scenes of destruction after another night of rioting, looting, and fires. Police launching tear gas and rubber bullets in Minneapolis. Days of fury after 46-year-old George Floyd died while Officer Derek Chauvin was seen kneeling on his neck for almost 9 minutes. Chauvin has been charged with murder. The 3 other arresting officers have been fired.
What's happened to George Floyd is indelibly etched into the soul of Minneapolis.
In New York, violent protests, police cars set on fire, dozens of officers injured. NYPD vehicles drove into crowds to gain some control.
Clearly, we need to do a full investigation and look at the actions of those officers and see what was done and why it was done.
Cities from Philadelphia to Los Angeles look like war zones. In Washington, D.C., an angry mob tried again to get over barriers outside the White House.
It was an organized group that appeared more bent on destruction than on protest.
President Trump and others believe those inciting the violence are outside extremist groups. He has now designated the group Antifa a terrorist organization.
We can't have these Antifa militant radicals who are traveling across state lines using military tactics to attack our cities.
From coast to coast, thousands of businesses have been destroyed, police stations burned, streets impassable. Law enforcement now bracing for another night of unrest. Jennifer Johnson, NBC News, Washington.
So that's what's happening across the country. Mark, I was telling you that our son is in New York, living in Brooklyn, but was part of the protesting that was happening last night in New York City. Called me at the end of the night, must have been about, 11, 12 o'clock our time, so very late there, after he had ridden his bike about 25 miles to get back home to Brooklyn, and he was so exhausted and so frustrated, and talked about being in a group of about 200 and feeling that their voices were just squashed by the police use of force, that he was maced and super frustrated. It was interesting trying to have a dialogue with him about we have to have law and order, and there are so many great police officers out there, and even though we're in this time of frustration and angst as we watched over the last many weeks the injustices that have happened, we still have to have law and order, and there are a lot of great police officers out there. So, young people are struggling with trying to understand, especially
and it's a
young
balance.
African Americans.
Yeah, it's a balance, right, Joyce? I mean, we have thousands of people who want their voices heard right now, and with these curfews in place and these protests being shut down, it's the question has to be asked: how can people be heard? How can people protest what they feel is a grave injustice? I mean, that's a challenge, and I don't think there's an easy answer to that right now.
You're right. There's not an easy answer, but I think people want more than their voices heard. I think they really want action. So let's just start with Minneapolis, the sort of the boiling over point. I think in that particular case, people would like to see a prosecutor that the African American community trusts to take over the case. I think they'd like to see the FBI step in and make the arrests of these other officers so that they can have their day in justice and so that justice can be served. And also, how about a bipartisan focus on legislation to solve some of the inequities that we've seen in the justice system? So there are things that can happen beyond having our voices heard, right? I think that we're beyond that. I think the one message I'm hearing as I see these across the country.
Yeah, and it should be noted, and you mentioned this up in the newsroom before we went on tonight, that the current administration in the White House, one of the first things that they did is the Justice Department under the current administration basically said all of these consent decrees, which are legally binding documents between the federal government and local policing agencies like the city of Seattle, they basically said they're not going to enforce those consent decrees. Let's listen in now as the police chief of the mayor of the city of Bellevue is about to address us.
We learned from social media that a group of known gang members was planning to meet in Bellevue and cause trouble. At 3 p.m. today, a small group of protesters gathered outside Bellevue Square Mall with signs and what appeared to be a peaceful protest. Very quickly, At 3:45, two large groups converged on the smaller group, and they quickly began smashing windows and looting stores. They became a force of destruction. They were not there to protest the death of George Floyd, the tragic death of George Floyd. They were there to destroy. As the mayor said, we welcome peaceful protesting. We want citizens to exercise their First Amendment rights, but a large contingent of this group came here with the intent to destroy property and steal things and assault police officers. Mutual aid has been requested. Washington State Patrol, Kirkland, Redmond Police Departments, and others. I sounded the alarm and they responded. We have over 200 law enforcement professionals assisting us, and currently officers are inside the mall attempting to secure it because the doors were breached and these individuals made an entry and started looting. And we've seen looting throughout the downtown area. There's been destruction of property, and there have been assaults on innocent bystanders and assaults on police officers. We're not going to tolerate it. With the mayor's assistance and her leadership and initiating this curfew, we will be enforcing that curfew. And my message to anybody else that's thinking about coming here, don't do it, because you're going to go to jail. Thank you.
And we did have some questions from the media submitted, and Chief, since you were up there, the first one is this the first time Bellevue has utilized or requested help from the National Guard?
This is the first time that it has happened under my command as Chief of Police, and I'll tell you this is the first time in my career, in 31 years, that I've ever had to ask for the National Guard.
And can you please repeat the question?
Yes, the question was, has the Bellevue Police Department ever requested aid from the National Guard before? And again, to my knowledge, at least I can tell you, since I've been Chief of Police since 2015, the answer is no, we've never had to. We've had numerous protests in the city of Bellevue, and they've been peaceful. And our officers are honored to assist to ensure that the protests go on peacefully and everybody's constitutional right is guaranteed. But this is something different, folks. The individuals that are down here, I'm telling you, I was down there for the last 2 or 3 hours. Not one that I came across, and I came across hundreds. I didn't even hear George Floyd's name. They're not down there to protest what happened to this innocent man. We all condemn it. Law enforcement condemns it. We stand united with the public on this. We're disgusted by what happened to Mr. Floyd at the hands of law enforcement. We take it personal when that happens. But how dare criminal elements come into our communities and destroy what so many people have worked so hard to build? A peaceful community. It's reprehensible.
And one more question for you, Chief, from Seattle Times. How will the curfew be enforced tonight?
We're going to make everybody aware of it. The question is, from the Seattle Times, how will curfew be enforced tonight? We're going to make everybody aware of it, and if they don't leave, they're going to go to jail. We're going to use the resources wisely, and I'm not going to talk about tactics, how we're going to do what we're going to do, but we're going to do it. And if people do not leave and heed the mayor's rule and the curfew ordinance, they will go to jail.
Chief, if I may, we saw a lot of disruption yesterday in Seattle. When I asked the mayor and chief there what they would have done differently, they said that planning for a peaceful protest and planning for a riot are two very different game plans down on the ground. You said initially you had advance notice, and we even talked to the police department hours before this protest was set to take place because we were getting tips that people were planning on this destruction at Bellevue Square. One even said that Bellevue can rebuild this in a day, let's go down there. So were we not prepared for rioters at this point?
Yes, we were. We actually started getting that intelligence yesterday after Mayor Durkin initiated the curfew ordinance. And we started seeing automatically, well, Bellevue doesn't have a curfew. Let's go there. And to your comments, we started even tracking that overnight. We started mobilizing 2 days ago, actually. We've been in a posture to support Seattle. We have many resources in the city of Seattle helping. Every one of my bike officers was there, and every one of them was injured in the course of the protest down there. But we have been prepared as you can be. And that's just the thing. This group swelled very quickly. Our resources were in place, but we're kind of at a disadvantage because we can't do certain things until certain things happen. We can do other things in advance, and we prepared. And we were in contact with the Downtown Business Association and others, and we were coordinating and talking under the leadership of our city manager. But, you know, there's only so much that you can prepare for. Then you need to respond. And first and foremost is the preservation of life. And, you know, preservation of, even with these individuals that are hell-bent on destruction, they still have, you know, we're going to value their life, but also the safety of my employees and other law enforcement officers that are down there. I hope I answered your question.
What can you tell me about any injuries that we've seen? We know that officers and protesters were injured in Seattle yesterday. Are we seeing the same thing here in Bellevue? Are any of your officers injured?
So the question is, have any of my officers been injured and compared to what we've seen in Seattle? Not to the extent that we saw in Seattle. One of my officers is in the hospital right now. I'm not going to discuss his medical issues or anything like that. It's directly related to our response to this incident. I know I got rocks thrown at me. A rock missed a big, you know, almost a brick, missed my head by about this much. And that's common, what we're seeing down there. They're throwing bottles, they're throwing anything they can get their hands on, and then they're running. And they're running in multiple directions. So they're trying, let me also say this real quick. This is not an unorganized group. They planned this, they have tactics to defeat police tactics. They have been successful up to this point. They try to spread law enforcement resources in multiple directions. So we're responding and we're making adjustments as we go along to the situation.
Chief, Seattle Times would also like to know what your message is for people who live there, people who are working or need to be downtown for other reasons.
So the question is, is there a message to people that are residing in the downtown area and the businesses? Stay home right now. Don't go out to the streets. I came across so many people that were here visiting that were scared because they were surrounded by this mob. And we gave them escort, we got them out of the area, but for our residents that are living in the downtown area and to our business owners, I'm going to ask you to please stay out of the area until we're able to clear it out. Check our website, we will give periodic updates, and I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to clear it out in the next 12 hours.
And then one more question for the mayor about the timing of our issuing the curfew just a few minutes before, from Seattle Times.
What was the question?
Why did we issue the curfew just a few minutes before it went into effect?
Well, we were planning to get all our ducks in order so that we could enforce it when we have to be able to enforce it once you issue it. And so we had to make sure that all our safety procedures were in place and that the chief of police and our fire were ready.
Final comments, Mayor?
I'm just very sorry to see this happen to our beloved city, and I feel like Bellevue is a platform for people to express what they feel and what they need to say in a peaceful manner, and this is completely unnecessary.
All right, conclude the conference, please. Do you want to conclude?
Sure.
Thanks.
The mayor always and proudly says, diversity is our strength. Bellevue welcomes the world. We welcome the world. We embrace diversity. This is a model city for all things. And again, for people to come into our community, as they did in Seattle, and we've seen all over this country, don't think for a second, at least in my professional and humble opinion, that the individuals that are creating this havoc, coast to coast, north to south, The governor in Minnesota said it, I think, very, very well. We went from peaceful protests, outrage at what happened to Mr. Floyd, justifiable, absolutely. We mourn with the family. We're united with the community, but it moved into something different. And the individuals that are doing this do not they don't care about civil rights, and they do not care about Mr. Floyd. Like I said, not once, folks, not once did I hear Mr. Floyd's name mentioned in the individuals I interacted with in our downtown area. So we're going to handle this. We are going to get past this. Bellevue is resilient. We've got phenomenal leadership with our mayor and the city council and the city leadership team, and we're going to get through it. And we're going to learn some lessons from this. So thank you very much.
All right, so that's us hearing from Bellevue's police chief and mayor today talking about the
So
protest happening.
we've been listening to the Bellevue police chief, Stephen Milet, talking about how this is the first time under his command that they've ever called up the National Guard for the assistance they need tonight in Bellevue, as there are some peaceful protests happening, and then these people who are under the pretense of protesting actually decided to start looting the Macy's store and potentially others inside there. It's pretty shocking.
Joyce, it was chilling what the police chief just said, that this is an organized effort by known gang members to systematically loot. And he said they are organized, they have a plan, they try to spread out police resources, and then they move in with their plan to loot. So this is a chilling sub-story to what's been going on, and the chief emphasizing that not once today did he hear the name George Floyd. As we look at, that was video on Twitter from the Macy's store being looted, and there's Lincoln Square right now, and we can still see people with bags of goods walking around in the area there. So we want to bring you back here now to the city of Seattle. Interstate 5 is shut down in both directions leading into the city. The curfew's been in effect for about an hour and 15 minutes now. If you're coming down from the north, you're going to be forced off the freeway at Roanoke there. You can see those cars on the left are splitting off to 520 to get across Lake Washington. And to the south, if you're heading up from the south to get up into the city at Holgate, you will be forced off of Interstate 5 so that you can get onto either I-90 or on side streets. All right, we want to bring in Trooper Rick Johnson on the phone right now. Trooper Johnson, can you hear us?
I can.
Thank you for joining us. So I have a couple of quick questions for you. One, we're looking at the shutdown of Interstate 5 as it's leading into the city of Seattle. Tell us about that first, and then talk about the possibility of road closures in and around Bellevue.
So I-5, like we did yesterday evening, our main goal is to obviously keep people safe, and pedestrians on the freeway is not a safe situation. So until we feel comfortable reopening and making it safe for the motoring public, then it'll remain closed. And obviously, we want to get it open as quickly as possible, but we still want to operate responsibly and not have pedestrians versus cars out on the freeway. So that's, I think I just heard you say exactly where the diversions were to get off of I-5. And we ask people just avoid the area if at all possible.
Bellevue just went into lockdown just a little bit ago. Of course, 405 goes right through the heart of Bellevue. Do you have any plans to limit access via those exits right around 8th and some of those other streets in Bellevue?
At this point in time, we have the exits to downtown Bellevue closed down working obviously in conjunction with Bellevue, who's the lead agency here, to prevent more vehicles from coming into the downtown corridor where they have protesters.
So obviously, Governor Inslee said that the State Patrol has been deployed. You have what, 1,100 troopers in the state of Washington? Is that right?
I'm not sure the exact amount, but we have a number of our rapid deployment force teams, which are trained even more than the normal trooper to deal with these types of situations. I know that we have 2 teams near Bell Square area, and then we have 2 teams over in Seattle working with Seattle Police Department. And from what I understand, we've got other teams that are probably resting right now, so we're bringing in as many resources as necessary upon the request of Seattle and other surrounding cities.
And how's it been going so far? What are you hearing from the men and women on the front lines?
Well, I was communicating with one of my fellow troopers that is on one of those teams. He said, long days, but we're okay. We're going to support Seattle and do what we need to do to keep, the best we can, life and property safe.
All right. Anything else, Trooper Rick Johnson, you want to add to our viewing public who may be watching?
Well, we just want to ask people to not, travel into downtown Seattle or downtown Bellevue and stay clear because we don't obviously need more people, in those areas right now. And from what I understand, Bellevue has a curfew now, as does Seattle. So honor that so we can do our jobs and this night peacefully.
All right, Trooper Rick Johnson, appreciate the work that you and your colleagues are doing. Thank you for joining us here on King 5. Joyce?
We want to get back to what's going on in Seattle. A pretty large protest that we've been following for the last couple of hours. And we have a couple of people of our reporters down there. Vanessa Mashanya, let's get to you. Is it breaking up? Are people still peacefully protesting? What's happening?
Hey, Joyce, we're at 12th and Pine, really right in front of the police station on Capitol Hill. There's these metal barricades right in front of this crowd where the marchers stopped, and they're remaining peaceful. Most protesters right now are kneeling, some with their hands up, continuing the message that they have ever since they took off in Westlake. This is the same group that has been maintaining the peace all day. They've kept nonviolence as their main point here, and they didn't want to have anything like yesterday overshadow the message and the purpose of why they are in the streets today. So again, this is the group that started around 3:30 this afternoon, going from Westlake to 2nd to 4th, back to Westlake, and then around 5 o'clock, that was when they started making their way up to Capitol Hill. Curfew did hit at 5 o'clock, and the organizers were honest. They were saying, hey, you can go home. If you go home, go on and organize and try to push the message forward. But if you do choose to come with us past the curfew at 5, just promise to keep it peaceful. And even earlier in the day, we did see a couple arrests in this group. We did see 1 or 2 or 3 antagonizers, but those were stopped by the leaders of this march. Anyone who was really trying to antagonize police when they were making their way around downtown, they're like, hey, this is not what this is all about, and they've kept it peaceful. The marchers are maintaining a nonviolent approach here. I've even seen folks with garbage bags picking up trash along the way as they are marching around Capitol Hill, which we've been going around for the past hour and a half. So again, we're right here, 12th and Pine. You can see right here that some of the leaders are talking to the police officers, and they've really maintained a friendly banter whenever the leaders have talked to police officers for the most part. I talked to one organizer, his name was Carl Smith, and he was telling me that he actually worked with police to plan this thing today, and was saying that, we're saying that, they're saying that, they wanted to keep this peaceful. They wanted to keep it peaceful because that was the only way that they could get their message across, and march for George Floyd, for anyone that they feel as though the system has wronged them because of the color of their skin. And that was the main message here. They're keeping it peaceful. And
Vanessa, this is Joyce. I'm just curious that officers seem to be having a full-on conversation with several people around him. Is there any way we can hear what he's saying? Is there any way you can get close enough to hear what he's actually talking to them about?
I'll try to get the mic closer for you, Joyce.
And as you do that, a couple of observations, quite a diverse crowd. It seems it's a very, very diverse crowd in age, in ethnicity, and they must be much more pleased with the outcome today so far. But anyway, I'm curious what this officer's saying.
Yeah, this is a very diverse crowd, and a crowd that has a single message. We talked yesterday about keeping the peace, and how some were detracted from the message by starting fires and causing chaos. This is not that group. From what I've seen today, this is not that group. And I'm going to put the microphone a little closer so you can listen in.
I think we just lost him, and he's back to work, talking with the other officers. But maybe ask those people, ask those folks there what they were talking about.
David, do you mind talking live on King 5 about what just happened? And so far? This is David Lewis. He's one of the organizers here. And what are you guys doing here in Capitol Hill? You were just talking to the officer. What were you saying?
Exactly. Initially, what we were trying to do is give an opportunity for the officers to stand with us. All we were trying to do was get to the precinct and show half of our officers show their support by letting us go there. Officer Diamond said we cannot move forward. We understand his need to protect his city and have the ability of coming out of the precinct. That's fine. We're now asking for them to show support of us by coming with us, crossing the line. We've proven that we're peaceful. We want them to cross the line. But if they don't want to come with us, we might have to keep moving as the people are doing.
Why do you want them to stand with you?
We want to know that we are protected. We've acknowledged our people, our communities now that they're with us. We would love for the officers to stand with us. We want to give them an opportunity to stand with us. That's it. We just want to give them an opportunity to stand with us.
And David, we've been following you guys all day. It's been peaceful. That has been your main message. Are you proud of the folks in this group?
100% proud. As I look behind me and as I look throughout this whole march, all the way from downtown.
We haven't broken no windows. We haven't broken no windows.
Exactly, all the way to Callenson Park, looped around and back. Not a single window broken. Not a single fist thrown. Not a rock. Nothing.
Are you proud of this
Everyone
group?
has been completely.
Are you proud of this group? Are you?
Exactly.
Or yes or no?
Yeah, are you?
From what I see, yes, I am.
Yeah.
So far, your eyes are really beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the peace has been maintained.
The peace has been maintained.
It has been nonviolent.
What we need to see now is we need a reason for everyone to disband. The way that we can get everyone to disband is if the officers come with us and stand. Then it'll be a win for us. We're keeping peaceful, but we need to give our community a win. We need to allow our officers to stand with us.
David, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there you had it. You heard one of the organizers, David, there. They were trying to talk with police to get them to stand with them. And that, I believe, really speaks to this group that we've seen all day, maintaining the peace, keeping things nonviolent, and sharing their message of Black Lives Matter, the injustices felt against people of color, and they want to, again, stand with police, and we're making that effort. So this group...
We just lost the signal there with Vanessa, but what an image that would be, right? The police officer standing with the protesters. I wish I could have heard more of what he was saying, but we'll try to turn some of that around for you so we can listen to it again. I believe Chris Daniels out, and he was listening to the mayor and the governor and the press conference that we had earlier. It was so powerful. Mark. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Joyce, I think what you're hearing as the afternoon progresses is people worried that the message and the conversation about racial inequities in this country and the death of George Floyd is going to be lost. I think it was very powerful what we heard here from some of the organizers of the peaceful protest yesterday as they stood with Washington Governor Jay Inslee and Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan and Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, trying to reiterate that, saying that they hope that their message has not been hijacked by some of the other events that we have seen over the last 24 hours. And there continues to be questions just about how police departments now in Bellevue and Seattle have handled what has transpired here in the last several hours.
These were not the acts of allies.
An uncharacteristic display of emotion from Seattle's mayor.
And it wasn't a downtown that I recognized.
Jenny Durkan claims outsiders are to blame for the destruction downtown, which came after a peaceful demonstration sparked by the killing of George Floyd. The damage is unlike any event in the last 2 decades, with opportunistic vandals
in a police department that on one hand is the target of the demonstration and yet still tasked with keeping the peace.
Yesterday, late afternoon and late into the evening, with looting going on throughout the downtown at multiple locations, people downtown well past the curfew. The folks had their way in our city, and that should never happen again. And we need to understand the level of resources that were deployed and how they were deployed.
And then they were joined by people who were intent at being disruptive and being destructive. And there's never been a successful change brought about by individuals who are angry and destructive. It requires people to begin to talk to each other about the changes that are needed, whether it is police officer training, whether it is that Black lives do matter.
Ron Sims is a former 3-term King County executive and current King 5 News analyst. He has marched in his fair share of demonstrations and hopes the message about Floyd's death is not lost.
I am a proud Black man. I'm tired of this. And we want responsible change. We want our concerns and our aspirations addressed thoroughly.
And you know by this point that the curfew in Seattle is in effect. It went into effect at 5 o'clock. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan says that allows for the city to take perhaps a different approach to anybody that is in the streets tonight, gives them a little bit more legal leeway. But she also pointed out that she had Washington Governor Jay Inslee by her side, that the stay-home order also is in effect. So she believes that there are 2 orders now in effect for people to stay home. It's a question of what exactly that enforcement looks like with that curfew. We have seen, at least in the part of the city that we're in right now, that most people are staying inside. That's the story for now. Live in Seattle, I'm Chris Daniels. Back to you.
Chris, I wanted to ask you, excuse me, we were watching the press conference and heard your question of the mayor asking whether the curfews actually do any good. Some people on Twitter have suggested that perhaps they may be doing more harm than good. Let's talk a little bit more about the curfew. And Police Chief Carmen Best said she fully intends to enforce the curfew. As you made mention last night, Chris, something like 55 people got arrested. But when we were on the air from 4 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., we didn't see very many people get arrested. The only people who got arrested were people who were attacking police. So my question to you is this honestly a resource issue when we talk about enforcing the curfew or not?
It's a great question, Mark, and I would point out to you, as having been in many of these marches before about all sorts of different subject matters, especially in the last, I'd say, 10 years, the Seattle Police Department has used a strategy in managing large crowds that involves a lot of police officers on bikes, bike units that will stay on the periphery of a march to keep people in the street, especially if they're registered. But I've seen a lot of unregistered marches as well, to allow people to make their way to places like Westlake Park. And then if people linger or people get into traffic, that's when you've seen police then use those bikes almost as fences to get people into different parts of town. I can remember a May Day a few years ago when the police officers used their bikes to push people up to the Pike Pine corridor to split a crowd onto 2 different streets, which was effective. I also saw one year another May Day when police used those same bikes to move people away from the property, the downtown property that was damaged last night, move them away to Soto. We didn't see that last night. We didn't see the bike units out doing what they've done in the past. There are questions about why that did not occur. We didn't get a direct answer today from Police Chief Carmen Best. She said those answers would come at a later time. We heard that as well from the Downtown Seattle Association, which had many of their members damaged in the overnight destruction. So that's going to be a question that will have to be answered down the road.
All right, Chris Daniels, thank you for that. Well, we have a very visual example of how protesters are not being arrested, at least yet. Joyce, you want to take it from here?
And not against us. Yes, there are issues
I think
that
you're referring to Bellevue. Right now in Seattle, all has been peaceful. Let's go back to Vanessa Mashanya. I think she has someone with her an interview. Vanessa, go ahead.
Folks go home today. What do you want the message to be today that people go home with?
I want our black people to know that our voices do matter, and I want our white allies to know that it is not our job as POC people to educate you about how to be good allies. There's the internet, there's books, there's speeches. It is your responsibility, if you have a black friend or a black child or anything, it is your responsibility as a white person to take control of the situation, to be in these front lines, to protect us, and to educate yourselves. That's what we want. As a mixed person, my white family is out here with me. My white family is getting tear gas just like me. They're out here kneeling with us. If you are a white ally, we love you, and we are so grateful because it takes your voices to help change. But we need you to do better just like them. You can't be as violent as them. If you're as violent as them, you're just like them. Be better, do better. We are love, we are peace. That's what I want my message to be. We are love and we are peace. If anything happens, if anybody gets hurt, if I get hurt, my message was I was love and I was peace. And I came out here to do that, to show that we can be love and we can be peace and our voices can be heard and we can make change and we can make difference. Just like the Martins and the Malcolms, this is our generation of a fight. This is our time. Our kids sitting right over there holding signs, they're
We just lost, I think we just lost Vanessa's signal. Unfortunately, I wanted to talk to her more about that. And I don't know if we still have Chris Daniels because I had some questions for him too, as a longtime Northwest resident, and his feelings on that. You know, we've been talking about how things have been calm today, for the most part in Seattle, very peaceful. In Bellevue, quite the opposite. We've been looking at looting, just insane looting happening in the store, organized apparently by gang members to distract police and then collectively go in and loot those stores inside of Bellevue Square. And they have the National Guard called in for the first time under this chief to help them try to protect property. But they're just going in, taking bags out, going back in, taking bags out. And I was looking at some video on Twitter from inside of Bellevue Square. Really, I think maybe 50, 100 people. I mean, really an organized situation of folks going in and going into a variety of stores and just like they're grocery shopping, just hauling out goods, retail items that don't belong to them. I mean, it's just pitiful to watch it.
Yeah, it says a lot, Joyce, that for the first time ever, Bellevue is asking for the National Guard to be deployed. And here in the city of Seattle, it was 21 years ago during WTO that the National Guard was last deployed in the streets of Seattle. So we are seeing a level of violence and a level of protest, a level of outrage that we have not seen in 2 decades in this area. And how all of this is resolved is going to be, I think, the question. And I'm sorry that the signal froze from Capitol Hill where Vanessa Mashanya, but a man who was raised by both black and white parents was saying, we need white allies on the front lines of this. We need you to join us to solve this problem. And what a poignant speech he was giving there.
And adding that it's not the job of people of color to educate people who are white, that there's so much information out there. But if you can educate them, I say, you know, more power to you. That's what I say. You know, it was interesting too, they were talking about, you know, that the message of nonviolence, but also of justice and the inequalities that we've seen across the justice system. And I want to go back to something you just said, Mark. You said this is the most that we've seen in the way of protests and even rioting in the last 2 decades. Really, I think it's the most we've seen since the 60s. You know, 75 cities across the country yesterday had protests. More than 12, adding today, well over a dozen now have instituted curfews. we have not seen those numbers since 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, when really, that's the last time. I mean, we're talking a generation of people for the first time seeing protests like this across the country.
It's really interesting, isn't it, Joyce, when you look at what happened in 1968 with our country mired in Vietnam, and you look at what's happening today. I mean, this isn't happening in a vacuum. We are under an immense amount of stress right now in our country because of COVID-19. You know, about 25% of the population is unemployed right now. Everybody's locked down in their homes. People of color, communities of color are being disproportionately harmed by this COVID-19 pandemic. So you look at 68, you look at today, there are a lot of similarities when it comes to just the amount of pressure our society is under and how that pressure is now boiling up. Because of what's been happening.
The video we were just looking at of what happened to George Floyd, that was just basically the last straw that ignited the powder keg, right? And what I think a lot of people might be failing to miss in that video, but perhaps not, it's not just the officer that was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. It was the other officers who seemed to show indifference, like it was another day at the office, that it wasn't something that was, it didn't appear to be something that was out of the ordinary, that it looked like it was part of the culture. And it was those images, I think, that have caused people to just be up in arms and not just outraged, but really sad about what they see, because we're really talking about systemic racism within law enforcement. That's what that image, I think, represented to a lot of people.
And I think, you know, Joyce, you and I had a moment on the air last night, and I'm just going to ask our producer, Tom, to hold on for just a second. I know we need to get to Chris Daniels, but you and I had a moment last night on the air, and I think what we had in that moment, Joyce, was a microcosm of what needs to happen across society. And just to catch those of you up at home if you weren't watching last night. So Joyce and I have sat next to each other for years, 5 years on the morning show together. We have had, I can't even count the number of discussions that we've had about race, about racism, about your life experience, about my life experience. And then coincidentally, this past week at King 5, our management had a seminar on race and racism. One of the top experts in the region, who was the first diversity officer for the Seattle Public Schools. We all got together and talked about race this week. And oh my gosh.
Almost 100 of us.
On Zoom. And the timing of that was unbelievable. But I've had a chance to think about this. What people are being asked to do is what you and I have done just sort of naturally over the past years that we have known each other. You have taught me more about race than anyone that I know. And it's not that it's like you're preaching to me what racism is. All you've done is share what your life experience has been.
But Mark, it's because you've had a genuine curiosity and wanted to understand. And I want to take you back to one of the first conversations we had many, many years ago, when you wanted to know if I would just trust you implicitly. And I said, well, no, trust is something that you earn. And you were completely miffed by that. Because you didn't understand where I was coming from. Right? That as an African American person, I'm not just going to trust you. I have to see that you're trustworthy. From my own experience. And from there, we have become so close that that's where the relationship has grown from there, because it was understanding why I couldn't meet you at a place of trust from the first day. Right?
And I have learned, and I'm just going to be so honest right now,
You're going to talk about our boys now, aren't you? About how we have different fears about our children. Yeah, I know.
This is hard. This is hard. Joyce's life experience and my life experience, my eyes have been opened so much to what white privilege is. I've never had to have a discussion with my boys about what to do if the cops pull them over. Ever. Thought has never entered my head. And Joyce, you've opened my eyes to the fact that that is life for people of color in this country. People of color, parents have to have that discussion constantly. If you get pulled over, this is what you do. Do not hide your hands, keep your hands on the wheel, do exactly what the officer says. You know, my son can just have his lunch break in his car and not get hassled by police. we don't get followed in stores because people think we're going to shoplift. So getting back to what my point in the beginning was, is that the relationship that you and I have had is what I think we all need to do, is to take that step and be brave and know that we're going to make mistakes, know that we're not going to say always the right thing. But I can tell you guys, and I've had a lot of pushback from what we talked about last night on the air. I've had a ton of support from people.
Good.
But some people have gone off on me and have been really vile toward what I was suggesting. All I'm suggesting is that if we're going to solve this, there is a problem. Clearly, there is a problem in our country of systemic racism. If we are going to solve it, we all have to recognize that we have a role to play. And that role is to do a self-assessment of what our perceptions and what our biases are. And then we have to start reaching out to our friends of color. And we have to have that honest dialogue. And it's scary, yes. It's uncomfortable sometimes, yes. You're going to make mistakes, but I guarantee you that the relationship that you and I have today, Joyce, is so rich and deep because we have a level of mutual respect.
And also, I think that you believe me when I say, as a mother, it is just a fact that every mother of color in this country worries about their children, men and boys and girls. I worry about my daughter, too. It's just a fact that every night we worry about whether they're going to be safe. It's just part of the life that we live. It's just a fact. Some people don't, maybe they don't believe that. And maybe that's not a worry that you have every day, but it is one that I have. And the conversation that we talked about with our son, we've had it multiple times.
Yeah.
I had another conversation with him last night about the police are on his side. But he's had enough of experiences. I told you about one experience this past summer on a break in a park where he grew up he was born and raised on the east side. And on a break in a park, 3 officers knocked on his car window at noon because someone in the park saw an African-American boy in his car with dreads and they thought he was a drug dealer. Well, you know, officers on the east side, there's 1 to a car. That means 3 officers responded to my son in a park.
Because he was sitting in his car.
Because he was sitting in his car talking on the phone during a break from his job. And then he had to explain to them where he worked. This is my shirt. This is my name. I work here. This is my neighborhood. In his own neighborhood. Yeah. So that was being stopped by police while being black in your neighborhood. Yeah. It just is. It's just real. And he did what we said. He talked to the police. He explained to them what he was doing. He followed their directions. And at the end of that conversation, the officer said, "We are so sorry that we had to have this talk with you. Somebody called and told us they thought there was a drug dealer in the park, and we are so sorry." Yeah. But the first response was, who was it in the park that thought my son was dealing drugs in his car on his break? If your son had been sitting in his car at the park during his break, that would not have happened to him. Yeah. And that's just the reality that I think African American families live with. And I'm going to add one more thing. Mm-hmm. I heard Van Jones say this morning that we are one videotape away from major civil unrest in this country, from people burning down their cities, one videotape away. So I would only say to that, I hope he's wrong, but the videotape is just the evidence, but it happens to an untold number of people, African American, black and brown people, every day, that's not on videotape, that has gone completely unreported or unrecognized, or they have not seen justice because they didn't have the videotape. So just because we've seen 3 or 4 videotapes, you can multiply that exponentially about how many times it has happened every single day somewhere in this country. Yeah. And that's why people are upset.
Well, I'm sorry that I got emotional, but
don't apologize.
You know me, that I wear my heart on my sleeve.
I was crying last week.
So. I just want to let you know at home, our point is not to preach. Our point is that we really all just have to come together, you guys. If we're going to come together as a country, our country is just getting more and more divided by the day. We really just have to come together. And a lot of people are throwing around quotes from Dr. King, and I really would love, I wish Dr. King were alive today to weigh in, but I found a quote from MLK that I think is really appropriate. Violence as a way of achieving racial justice is both impractical and immoral. It's impractical because it's a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. The old law of an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. That's not to say that we have to just sit back and let things happen. We all can act, but we got to do it from a place of goodness and a place of love if it's going to make a difference.
And you know, I believe too, if you're not part of the solution, then you have to ask yourself if you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I thank you for that exchange, my friend.
I love you, Mark.
I love you too, Joyce, and to be continued, that discussion.
Yes.
You know, it's an ongoing, it's a journey. It's not a destination.
It's
And
a journey.
you know, I wanted to talk. A lot of people have been saying that Seattle's going to hell in a handbasket. This morning was a clear example of an amazing outpouring of support from our community. Jake and Mimi have the story of how people got up bright and early today to clean things up.
Yep.
Take a look.
All right, so this is the first time I've been in the studio here in over 2 months.
White people, I need you at the front!
My first newscast here because of all that happened in Seattle over the weekend.
We showed up in what looked like a war zone this morning.
Mimi Jung's downtown all morning, but throughout the morning the story evolved into something just good. I'm curious your thoughts being down there this morning.
I honestly didn't expect it. To actually stand next to these stores that have been vandalized. When I first got there and saw all the damage, there's just this feeling of heartbreak and just a massive effort to clean all of that up. We started seeing, cleaning crews from Recology show up, but then we started to see somebody with a broom.
We're here to help pick up and do what we can, and thought if we got out here early, it would be safe.
You interviewed this mom and her son, and she was using it as a lesson, and the boy said this was just amazingly crazy, I think is the words that he used.
Amazingly crazy how all of this can be done in just one day.
I think he was feeling it too.
In a matter of an hour, we started to see parents bringing their kids, people who were coming from Renton, from the South End, people who didn't even live in Seattle, coming with their own supplies just to sweep up or do whatever they could. And it immediately turned into this massive city cleanup party.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I feel like this was unlike anything we've really seen in the city, but I feel that the cleanup was unlike anything we've seen too.
Kind of upset about, because they piggybacked off of a peaceful demonstration,
Tell me what you're feeling right now.
I don't even know. I don't know. It's heartbreaking. This is not the way to put your anger out.
It is emotional. We don't want to see our city this way, but it's also emotional because there are people who are helping and doing what they can, and I don't know. It's just sad. It's really sad.
Sorry, I'm with you, Meme.
When I first got there this morning, what I saw was ugly. And within a matter of hours, what I saw was honestly beautiful. Community coming together, to people smiling and doing good.
I think that's really going to stick with me.
It was Seattle at its best.
I love that.
So
Wow.
I think in the memory of George Floyd, that's what we want to see, right? Community coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have just about 3.5 minutes left before we're going to sign off. We want to let you know that throughout the evening we will be cutting in. This is a live picture of what's going on Capitol Hill here in the city of Seattle. So far things have stayed peaceful. Vanessa Mashania has been covering things there. Protesters want it known that they intend to stay peaceful in their efforts tonight. Something that just happened that's a really big development, though. Governor Jay Inslee has just approved 200 National Guards, men and women, to go to the city of Bellevue, which is now under a curfew, as is the city of Seattle. Looting has taken place in the city of Bellevue. The Macy's has been extensively looted, and so that approval has now gotten the green light from Governor Jay Inslee.
Yeah, the looting that's been going on in Bellevue for the last few hours, I think police are obviously on the scene there now, but they weren't for a good while, and the people who were going in and out and just hauling out armloads and bucket loads of merchandise was shocking. And the police chief said in Bellevue that was an organized strategy by a group that had the intention of doing exactly that kind of vandalism, which was really sad to hear. But it's good to see these people who are protesting peacefully and marching and standing for what this was all intended to be, peacefully protesting injustice and asking for justice in the situation that we saw unfold in Minneapolis.
Yeah. So we will be back at, still have a couple of minutes left, but just wanted to give you guys a heads up. We'll cut in as conditions warrant, but as both the mayor of Bellevue and the mayor of the city of Seattle have said, these cities are under a curfew right now, so there's no reason to come into Seattle unless you're working, or into Bellevue unless you're working or live there. The State Patrol, we heard from Trooper Rick Johnson, Interstate 5 at Roanoke coming southbound into the city is shut down. Northbound at Holgate, you'll be diverted off Interstate 5, and the exits off of 405 into downtown Bellevue have been shut down as well. Joyce, it'll be interesting to see, this group seems to be intent on protesting in Seattle tonight, and both the mayor and police chief said they intend to enforce the curfew. It will be interesting to see if at some point police will force protesters to go home, or if they remain peaceful, we'll simply let them disperse on their own as the evening continues.
Well, we're well past the curfew, so at this point it looks like they're going to let them peacefully protest at this point. And I want to, since we have a few seconds, we were listening to Pastor Kerry Anderson of the First AME Church in Seattle, the oldest church, was here before our state was a state. He was talking about COVID and the spread of COVID, and if it can spread by a human touch, why can't love spread the same way? And I thought that was such a beautiful message, right? Why can't we come together in this very same way and do what's right and do what's good and look out for each other and change the inequities that we see, especially during this period where we are in the middle of a pandemic, where so many people are, suffering with their health, their jobs, and more. This is the time that we really need to see the country come together.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Joyce, it's so good to be in the same building. That's our coverage for now. We're back with cut-ins and at 10 and 11.